This is House Planning Help episode 116. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build, because I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that might get in our way. Alongside this, I'm still trying to tackle my own project, the desire there to create an energy-efficient home before I turn 40, which is coming up this August. With me in this session, my guest is Mike Whitfield from Mike Whitfield Construction, and we're going to be looking at how to find a builder, a good builder that is, of low energy homes. Before we launch into the interview, just a quick reminder that I'm going to be at EcoBuild this year, and on the first day, that's Tuesday the 8th of March 2016, we're going to be holding a meetup. So if you fancy coming along to that, it'd be lovely to come and say hello and to tell me about your dreams, your plans, or perhaps you're midway through, halfway through, even getting towards the end. Whatever the situation, we welcome you there. We've also got Alex Baines. We've been featuring his project Long Barrow Passive House in the hub, and it's been fantastic to watch that come out of the ground and the ups and downs of his story too. So he's going to be there. He'll probably share some of the information of how his self-build journey has been. If you fancy coming along, it's free, and all you need to do is just make sure that you've signed up so I know to expect you. So go to the show notes for this session and head to the bottom, houseplanninghelp.com/116. Let's get to our featured interview with Mike Whitfield from Mike Whitfield Construction. And as a way of introduction, I'm going to read you two tweets, which I will mould into one, from Andy Simmons of Simmons Mills Architects. This was when I was researching, just saying, who's a good builder? Who would you recommend? Who might give us some tips? And quite a few people pointed out Mike. So Andy says he has the attitude of an old master builder. He's forward-looking, he uses PHPP, he uses and refines carbon light guidance, he's equitable, fair. He and his team track costs of labour on site to the nearest 15 minutes, apparently to refine the accuracy of their job costing. So I thought he's a great candidate to help me understand more about what it is that he does on a day-to-day basis and how we find a Mike Whitfield near us, because he's only in Hereford. If you're in Hereford, then you might be lucky, you might be able to hire his services. So we get underway. I started by asking Mike how he became interested in this area.
Well, I suppose in the late 80s, I went to work for a builder who did, I can't even remember what we used to call it, but sort of natural building. It was before we knew about energy efficiency, but we try and use a lot of reclaimed materials and natural products. And from that, I gradually moved into energy efficiency, really, when I did a job in 96, it was 20 years ago, which had an energy consultant on it. I realized that maybe 15 years before that, I had worked on a job with a degree of energy efficiency, but I hadn't really realized the implications of it all. And once I did this job in 96, it sort of reawakened my interest in it. And we started then on a sort of energy efficient journey, and we sort of improved every year, really. And then when the passive house stuff hit Britain, which I think was about 2008, it was a natural progression for us, really. And then in 2010, I just decided to specialise just in passive house, or at least I'm not even sure whether we're allowed to say passive house principal building.
Don't go down that road.
Yeah. But we've done quite a few certified passive houses now, and whenever we do an extension, we use passive house detailing. We've done a few retrofits as well.
You said something quite interesting there, that you year on year got better at what you were doing for quite a long time and tried to make things more efficient. I'm assuming that's not a typical mindset of a builder.
No, I wouldn't say that it is, but I mean, for me, it's just, it has been very interesting. We were just constantly improving our assembly methods and our detailing, going to ACB conferences.
But you're one of few builders that go to the ACB conferences, aren't you? To be fair.
Yeah, but I think there's probably more builders out there who could be enticed if they knew more about it. But for me, it's been great. It's a really good sharing environment. I've spoken a couple of times or a few times at the conferences, and I've learned a lot from other people too. I think it's really, really good.
The main reason that I've come to you is really because of your reputation. It precedes you, and a lot of people think very highly of you and how you build. So you talked about trying to improve things over the years, but if we want to find someone who's very good at building low energy buildings, we'd obviously come to you if we're in this area. But what are we looking for?
I think you're really just looking for someone who has a genuine interest in it. That's the issue, really. I mean, it doesn't really matter. If you're a reasonably competent builder and you've got an interest and, you're prepared to learn and you're prepared to actually take things on, look at something you've just done and think, I could have done that a bit better, then, you can get there fairly quickly. There's a lot more information out there now than there was. But I think builders are kind of singled out for not being up to speed. But there's also people in all other walks of the building industry who aren't up to speed either. But I agree that when you go to these conferences, there does seem to be a predominance of architects and consultants and so on.
If I'm looking for you, then, is it a bit easier these days that I just search for someone who specializes in passive house, but that doesn't necessarily deliver someone who knows what they're doing, or does it?
I would think if someone has decided to specialize in it, then they must be fairly well on the way. I mean, the whole point about passive house is that it is certified, it's all measured. So you can't really say you're doing a passive house and then not do one. This is why we've been so busy the last few years, because once you get a track record of actually being able to deliver, an airtight, thermal bridge-free building, then people will come to you because they know that you can actually do it. Whereas going to a, genuine, well-meaning but inexperienced builder is bound to be a bit of a gamble. We just done our job for an owner builder, a shell-only job, which was actually quite a tricky design. The whole building was very odd shape. It was a new build, but it had a sort of extension on the end of it. It would have been quite difficult. It required a lot of supervision for me to even get our team to do it. We got an airtightness of 0.19, worked out pretty well, but it was a lot of work. And I was thinking about that afterwards and thinking, well, really, if I was doing that as a first off passive house attempt, I think it could have been quite difficult. It might have put a builder off passive house, really.
So what are the differences? I suppose it almost might be difficult for you because you've learnt this incrementally and then you've very much been doing this for the last few years. But what are the differences between a traditional builder and what you do?
I think it's really the attention to detail. That's really what I focus on.
I hear that a lot, but what does it mean?
Well, what it really means is that you can be working on a very highly finished building or a really good conservation building project. And really, if you've got a good plasterer, then it's bound to look okay. And a good second fix carpenter. But it's just not like that with passive house. There's a lot more thought needs to go into it. And, I always say to people, with a passive house, you have to do A, B, C. And you often tell people to do that, and then you come back and they say, yeah, we've done it all. Look, A, B, and C are done. And you look at it and you realize that they've done B, A, C. And then when you speak to them, they say, yeah, it's all right. We've done it all. Look, it's all done. A, B, and C are done. And you look at it and you think, but you've done B before A. And it's really that level of thought. I mean, that is actually quite a good illustration. You just have to do things in the right order. The biggest challenge in building is doing things in the right order, really. And it sounds a lot easier than it is, to get the materials there and the right people there at the right time so that everything flows in the right order takes quite a bit of experience. So to get back to your question about the what does it mean with the detailing, I think that is really what it is. Because if you don't, it becomes even harder to do it economically. You can do stuff, you can do BAC, you might be able to get away with it in certain times, but then it might take you 2 or 3 times as long as doing ABC. And the fact is we're trying to do passive houses, competitively. And so that's a big part of it.
It might help for us to go through an example either of the owner builder that you were talking about before or some other project, and just for us to understand what you do over the course of the weeks, from getting it in to begin with to signing up with that particular client to carrying out all of the work. So could you talk us through a project and your involvement?
Well, we've just done a run of shell-only builds. We've done 3 shell-only new builds for owner builders where we've just delivered an airtight passive house shell. Normally, we would do the complete job.
Why do they want that, first of all?
The shell-only. Well, I suppose it's for an owner builder who isn't really confident about delivering the passive house. We can actually do the shell, get the first air test done, and then they can finish it off. And it's not a bad approach, really. It will work out, quite a bit cheaper than using a contractor to do the whole job, but it's a lot less stressful for them, and it gets done a lot quicker. But anyway, to get back to the whole project question, a typical project, which would be, where we're delivering the house, so-called turnkey, we would initially want to be working with an architect who is on message. We're very lucky in Herefordshire because there's quite a few around here. And so it's quite unusual for us to work with an inexperienced architect. But if that is the case, we would recommend a passive house consultant who we also have in Herefordshire, who can help with the architect who may not quite understand what he's supposed to be doing. So ideally, we get a good set of drawings with some sensible details, which normally we would have an input into that. It's not always the case, but quite often, if I can see any improvements, there's usually no reason not to do it. So yeah, it's unusual, I suppose, for me to get good enough drawings to just hand them to the people who are working for me and say, here it is. But we have achieved that on a few jobs with a local architect firm. And next thing we would do is order the windows. We would start the groundworks. Ideally, we want to have the windows there, within a couple of weeks of starting the job, really. What we prefer to do is be able to put them in as we're building. It's much easier to do them as you go along, and also it helps protect the site. So, yeah, then we would do the insulation and air tightness, get the first test, then do the first fix, electrics and plumbing, then the plastering, then the second fix, tiling, etc. Also complete the MVHR system. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So my working day really is, I still think that I work on site.
But there's a whole new challenge, isn't there, when you have a team working under you, because it's not as if you do all the work and you know how to do it. So is it just a team that's worked with you for a long time that have got into the groove? Yeah,
I only really use people who've worked, well, some of them obviously have joined relatively recently, but they're all full employees, and there's 8 of us all together. And yeah, it's really difficult working with, even quite skilled carpenters or builders who aren't used to passive house. I find it takes, I can get a 30-something, carpenter who on paper seems quite good, and really it takes them at least a year, between 1 and 2 years, really, to really get their head around it. They've just simply got to do that length of time to experience enough jobs to fully understand all the, the pitfalls, really, and to see where the problems might arise, But now, we've got quite a good system now, because we've had a run of timber frame I-beam buildings. And that's what we've been doing today, actually. Just started the frame on a new job.
Sometimes you hear of people who have horrible experiences. They get a builder and they go bust. So why does that happen? How do we make sure that our builder isn't going to go down that route, or is it just you never know?
I think we have to say you never know. I mean, builders can get themselves in a mess. I think the strange thing about the building industry is it is possible to be quite a successful builder in inverted commas without anyone really checking up on what you're doing. And when people suddenly take on a passive house, I was involved in a project a couple of years ago where this happened. We were actually going to do a passive house, and the slot I had available for it didn't work out. It took too long to get it going. And so I wasn't able to take it on. And the client took on a reputable builder who had done work for the architect. And he just got in a massive mess with it and ended up, there was a terrible fallout, and financial and psychological. And but I can't really explain it except to say that, they just weren't being careful enough.
Are all these jobs you go at your own pace, you make sure you do the job well, or do some people try and rush you? Do you have examples of builds that have worked better than others, or is there a fairly steady pace and everything just has to happen as it happens?
I think some jobs definitely go better than others, but I wouldn't say necessarily that the clients themselves are the problem on a slower job, although obviously change management is a big aspect of running a building contract, and probably most small builders, myself included, underestimate the effects of even small changes. So, potential clients would need to be aware of that. But, I think in terms of selecting the builder and making it run smoothly, if you can find the right person or someone you think who would be interested in taking on a passive house, then, you've got to work with their program, really. The most stressful thing for me, in many ways, is actually turning up on time. It's very difficult to predict, because the whole process might start a year, 18 months in advance. And even from the point when you start thinking, right, let's order the windows, sign the contract, that it might be still 6 months before we're due to start on site. Well, that 6 months for me can easily become 7 or 8, just dealing with extras, and, it's very hard to predict your program. So I think you've got to be philosophical about waiting for people to start, but most people would be able to have pretty good stab as to how long the job would take before they start.
So that's one of the challenges of what you do as well, that you get a commission and then you're almost trying to time it right so that your employees are still being used on the next project, and that it's just a very smooth transition and you don't get too many projects that then give you a hiring headache. Yeah,
I think that is right. One of the things we didn't really touch on is your supervision. And we generally try and work one main job at a time. So we'll have 2 jobs on the go, but one's being finished and the other's being started. For me, 3 jobs is quite difficult, just getting around them. Passive house does require a higher level of supervision. Even experienced people, people who've been with me 10, 15 years, they still need help and supervision, because not every house is a simple box shape. If it was, I'm sure quite a few of them could manage it single-handed, but actually there's a lot of decisions that need to be made just to keep things running smoothly. And often there's a lot of detailing which hasn't been drawn by the architect, maybe. For instance, the exact dimension, the window position in the wall. And if you don't know that, and you've already ordered the window sill extensions, you can't put the windows in. It's that sort of thing. It really does require a lot of extra supervision.
Does it change, let's say it was a single builder or a group of 10 people to a business that's 100 people? Have you got to be more careful? Because when you get to that big stage, it's more management as well, isn't it? The more people you have, the more complex, or am I getting that wrong?
Yeah, I think I would only be speculating because I'm not that experienced at dealing with companies that large.
I'm just wondering whether there's any advantage of going for a bigger company or a medium-sized company.
I don't see there is. I think you're much better off going for someone you can actually deal with who's going to be personally responsible for it. But having said that, some spectacular passive house building projects have been done by bigger companies, but I'm talking on, schools and larger projects. But actually to do an individual house, if that's what you're talking about, I think you're much better off using a hands-on small building firm. It just needs to have someone there fully responsible. And the thing is, you can't really do it with subbies. It's very difficult to get subcontract carpenters in. Some of the big housing schemes, like co-housing schemes that have been done, where the builders have ended up using subcontract labour and the building company turns out to be basically a management company. We have heard stories of difficulties, where you're constantly retraining subbies and they don't really understand what they're doing, which goes back to what I was saying about experienced guys taking a year or two to get their head around it,
A question on working as a team. We sometimes hear of this triangle: client, architect, builder. Have your most successful projects in your mind actually had just this really good relationship as well?
Yes, I think so. I mean, that's a whole different subject. It's need another half hour for. But I mean, the point is, once you get fairly experienced, the actual building work is fairly straightforward. If the architect and the client just said they were going off on holiday, different directions for 6 months, and could we please finish the house before they got back, then that would be, quite simple. But that doesn't happen. So the key to the journey is just, really the relationships. It's how you get on with people. And it is a really big thing. I think perhaps a lot of builders don't pay enough attention to that. I'm not saying I'm perfect at it, but I think I am aware that, you do need to make sure, particularly the client, is feeling okay and assured that everything's running smoothly. It is quite alarming, the disappearing contractor scenario. And the communication with the architect, that needs to be, really good. And the best jobs are when, everyone's singing from the same hymn sheet and everyone was working on it beforehand together. We don't actually get involved in many tender jobs. And a lot of architects who are experienced with passive house realise that, the collaborative method is much better, to appoint a contractor really early on and then try and work up the price with them and do the detailing together and make sure everyone understands what's going on. I think that's a much better way of approaching it. I think if I was an individual homeowner doing a passive house for the first time, I wouldn't put it out to tender. I think, you just really, you wouldn't know that the person who wins the tender understands what he or she is about to do,
And that sort of brings us round to where we started as well, as to how do we find someone who is a good builder of low energy homes, passive houses. And we've talked a bit about attention to detail, experience, all of those things. Is there anything we can do in terms of assessing ourselves? Is this a good site? Is he doing a good job? Other than speaking to perhaps your previous clients?
Well, I suppose the AECB is a good starting point for choosing a builder. If you can find a local builder who's in the AECB, that means that even if they haven't done passive house, at least they're interested and they've probably heard of it. But yeah, it's worth looking at previous jobs. And I think it's just, all I would say is it must be fairly easy to detect the interest level in the builder. I mean, I've been to AECB conferences and met builders who've been there for their first time, and it's very obvious that they're actually genuinely interested in it, and even though they're not experienced, they would be able to take it on.
Well, let's just finish up this conversation. Is there anything else that you feel we should mention?
I think we pretty much covered it all. I suppose there is a whole other conversation to do with pricing and the cost of the job. I mean, you do need to realise that, it is different doing a passive house. And a lot of committed passive house builders are doing jobs quite competitively, actually. People always say, how much more does it cost to do a passive house? And we always sort of mumble and say, well, probably within 10% or something. But actually, you could easily be doing a passive house for less than another builder would be charging to do the same house to a very high quality. Whereas a passive house, by definition, is very high quality. So you might be getting, a better deal. But I think, you do need to be aware that, you're not going to get the same price per square metre as a building regs job. But even if it is 10% more, it's 10 times as good.
Mike, thank you very much.
Okay, it's a pleasure.
It's great to catch up with Mike at last, and also a guest appearance there. You might have heard Possum and Dingo barking in the background, even though they were on completely the other side of the house, but clearly wanted to make an appearance. houseplanninghelp.com/116 for this episode. Check out the show notes. You can review the key points from our conversation. Also check out a couple of his completed projects. And if you have a comment or you'd like to ask a question, then you can do that at the bottom of the show notes as well. Once again, houseplanninghelp.com/116. My call to action today is to check out the hub, and this is where we're constantly building it up. We're working on a module at the moment, but there are 2 modules there already. Trying to lay out a nice clear way through. In terms of the first module was planning permission, and then we've got one on finance as well, and we'll be adding another one in a couple of weeks' time. Then the other side of it is the case studies, and we've been going through the Long Barrow passive house story and just watching the build. I think the last one was to do with finishing off the foundations, and then we'll be looking at ICF and how that works and how they build up the walls on the next episode that we release of that. And then there's the community side of things. You can join our Facebook group, and that's working really well too. So it's a flat rate at the moment. The price will increase over time. For now though, £45 for the year, lock in as well. So if you lock in at that price, then that will be the same price to continue next year. More details, houseplanninghelp.com/hub. We'd love to have you join up. So we're pretty much done. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast. I always appreciate your time and for listening right to the very end. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.